Hi, I'm Steve and you're watching Car Simplified. Today I'm not going to tell you where you should shop for auto parts. There are a lot of places you can buy auto parts, and I'm going to split them into two main categories, online and in person. Either way you go, the obvious first thing that you need is to know what car you're repairing. The more you know about it, the better it's going to be. Start off with the year, make, and model. That's some basic stuff that you need to get out of the way right off the bat. Depending on what work you're doing, trim level, engine size, transmission options, there's going to be a lot of other things that are going to affect what part you need for your car. There may even be some things you don't expect to be related. There's a joke going around where someone calls up an auto parts store and says, I need wiper blades for this year, this make, this model. And then the parts store guy says, okay, what transmission is in it? The obvious joke there is that there's no transmission that's actually going to affect which wiper blades are on the car, but it stems from a real life problem with lookup systems. As someone that used to work the parts counter, when I see that, I go, oh, that. When you call an auto parts store, they're going to look up that part for you, and that's what the computer is asking them, and they're just relaying it to you. Just answer the question, and it's going to help, especially if you have more parts down the road, because a lot of those systems don't ask that question a second time. And if they just threw in an engine and then all of a sudden you need spark plugs, they're not going to remember that the engine was already picked and just go, oh, there's only one engine for that car, here's the spark plugs. Then you might end up with spark plugs for the big 4-cylinder instead of the small 4-cylinder. Plus, you never know what's going to affect what. Some system may have changed between one thing and another, and even though the parts aren't related to each other, they will affect each other for some reason. And even if you have 50 years of automotive experience, things are constantly changing. You're not going to know everything about every single car. The parts counter person might not be the most technically advanced person available, but they're not trying to waste your time or theirs. They're just following what the computer says, and a lot of the computers don't have a skip this thing option. They want to have that plugged in so that it can narrow down the parts based on what has been entered. No matter how much you know about your vehicle, just bring the VIN in just in case. Alright, now you're at the auto parts store, you've got your year, make, model, and any other information figured out, and now it's time to choose the part for your car. Sometimes there will be fine print that either you or the counter person needs to read to find the right part, but most of the time your options are going to be different brands. And I know from experience working at the parts store that usually people just go with whatever's on the shelf in the back. The trouble with this though is that all auto parts stores have to compete with pricing, and if someone's calling each auto parts store asking, hey, do you have this ignition coil for this car, not only are they asking to find out if you have it, they're asking to find out the price, and they're usually shopping like, oh, it's just an ignition coil, I'm going to go to the least expensive one and buy that. Auto parts stores know this and they try to stock their shelves accordingly. And parts counter people, they get stuck in a rut of just selling what's on the shelf because it's quick, easy, and it just has a whole lot less hassle to it in general. A lot of auto parts stores though have a lot of other brands available, including what some people think are dealer only items. You can actually get original equipment parts from the auto parts stores. A lot of times if they don't have a certain brand in stock, they can get that part in pretty quickly, sometimes faster than you can get it online too. If you find a local hub store, those have a wider inventory than your average store too. But because most auto parts stores serve the customer that needs the part now but is also shopping around, most auto parts stores are basically automotive convenience stores. Now let's move on to the other option, online shopping. When shopping online, you have to put in the year, make, model, and all that other information, but it's not as difficult as you might think. A lot of the bigger shops actually have a way to save your information so you don't have to look that up every single time you log in, but you need to make sure that information is accurate or you'll be buying the wrong parts every time. Well, not every time, but every time the inaccurate information comes into play. Buying online is often a lot cheaper because you're not paying to have someone with automotive knowledge help you along through the process. That being said, it may be worth just going out there to the parts store and paying a little extra for your parts just so you have that parts guy to run some ideas off of. If you're just changing your oil for the first time, spark plugs for the first time, any small first time automotive projects. You go in there and they'll ask you what you need. Like if you're changing your oil, they'll say, hey, do you have a funnel? They're trying to make the sale, but don't you need a funnel? Another example being if you go to change your oil for the first time in a car and you order the oil and filter online, wait for it to get to the house, finally shows up, you get underneath the car and realize there's a panel underneath blocking your access to the bottom of the engine that uses Torx head screws to remove it. Now you have to either order or go get that Torx head bit. If you went to the auto parts store and got that oil, You may have been told, hey, you need to take those Torx head screws out to access that engine. Do you have that tool at home? In that scenario, you only did one trip and you didn't have to wait for the oil. To be fair in that example though, most parts lookup systems don't have that information, and the parts counter guy would have to know that offhand in order to give you that information. So even in that case, you're probably not actually going to be saved a trip unless you encounter someone that really knows their stuff. And really, in order to get that kind of information reliably, you need to get that unicorn Goldilocks recently retired mechanic now working at an auto parts store. Alright, now that we've talked about shopping online and offline, we'll get back into the parts themselves. More specifically, how to know that you got the right part. The best way to do this, on top of knowing your year, make, model, and other information, is to actually bring the broken or used part in, or if it's completely broken and like melted away, bring the other one in that matches it so that there's an example that still has information on it, and bring that in so you can compare what's on the shelf or on the computer screen to what's on the car already. Be aware though that sometimes bringing the part in can lead you astray, because perhaps the part is prone to failure and they've completely redesigned it so it doesn't fail anymore. Blower motor resistors are a good example of this because they're often upgraded with a different resistor and or a different heat sink to help dissipate the heat more rapidly. Even with design changes like that, you'll want to make sure some basic things are right, like the way it bolts to your car, or anything else that's just uniform or needs to be exact about that part. Another thing you're going to want to do while you're at the counter before you leave the store is open up that box and make sure it's not damaged or used. This used to be a really big problem with electronic parts because people would buy the part, replace it on their car, take the used part, clean it up, stick it back in the box and come return it. And then you'd end up going to the store buying that part, trying to put it on your car, and then it doesn't work. And even when you try to return it, then they think, if they check the box on this one and not the previous one, then they think you're trying to do that. Because of that, a lot of automotive parts stores have changed their policy on electronic parts, and you can't return them unless they're still sealed up in a bag or something. So protect yourself, open up that box first, check out the part. One last thing to consider is the job you're doing. Do you need anything else for that job? In the example of a timing job, if a water pump is part of your timing belt routing system, just replace the pump. You don't want to be pulling the engine out, replacing all those parts again just because the water pump failed 10, 15,000 miles after you did that job. If you're changing a sensor on the lower part of the engine, consider buying some degreaser. You might have a whole bunch of dirt caked on there, and if you're changing the sensor out, dirt might get in the threads and really make it tough to get that sensor back in. Dirt might get into the new sensor and ruin it right away. If you're not sure if you're really going to need a part, ask if you can return it if it's unopened. It's so much easier to just get a job done all in one swoop instead of going to the parts store a few times to get that one little thing that you also need. Hopefully that makes buying auto parts just a little bit easier. Be sure to check out the comment section for other people's advice. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.